Space underpins all aspects of our society. Agriculture, forestry, wildlife and climate monitoring, logistics and transportation, power grids, medicine, innovation, you name it, it all depends on space. To make this happen, humans engage in a variety of space activities. We launch robots and humans into space, we deploy large-scale satellite constellations, and we run biology experiments in orbits around Earth and the Moon. Making all this work requires dealing with a lot of challenges, not only technological, but also legal, political, and economic. What are the main challenges to making space work for Europe? What are the legal, political, and economic tools the EU can use to realize its ambitions in space? How did they come to be? These and other questions will be answered in this MOOC on the fundamentals of EU space governance. We will discuss the history of space governance in Europe, the main actors and rules in this system, the main challenges it faces, and what the future holds. By the end of this course, you should be able to understand how EU space governance works from a legal, political, and economic perspective. You should be able to analyze how its different actors work together. And you should be able to identify some key issues and offer solutions to address them in the future. Let's start from the beginning. In this MOOC, we will talk a lot about the governance of space. What does this mean? Governance can be defined as all of the rules and institutions that work together to regulate a certain system. When this system is all of mankind's activities in space, we call it space governance. In other words, we can define space governance as the set of rules and decision-making bodies that regulate activities in the exploration and use of outer space. Space is a complex environment. It is owned by no one, and in that sense it is truly global. In theory, every state is free to use space in the same way. In reality, of course, space activities are costly and complicated, so using space is still too often the privilege of the most powerful actors. However, space services are being used by almost everyone in almost all aspects of our lives. As a result, space governance is complex too. At the global level, the international community negotiates rules for the use of space in a small number of international organizations. At the regional level, states with similar needs in space come together to provide and regulate their own space activities. Finally, there's the national level, where individual states adopt national space laws and policies to realize domestic space programs and to grow their private space industry. EU space governance is mainly concerned with the second level. The EU is a regional organization in which states with similar goals in space work together. Of course, the EU is not the only space organization in Europe. Think of the European Space Agency, for example. So, EU space governance is only a part of a broader system of European space governance involving other regional European organizations. European states also have their own national space programs, and both the EU and its member states participate at the international level of space governance too. So, the three levels of space governance clearly overlap. This brings us to the first aspect of the study of EU space governance, which we will tackle in the first module. Who are the institutions and organs in the EU that are active in space? From our short overview, it is clear that this institutional framework can include all sorts of actors, both EU organs and member states, as well as agencies with general and specialized tasks in space. A second module will discuss how these various actors in EU space governance perform their tasks. This can be described as the legal framework of EU space governance, which tries to answer the questions of space competence within the EU, how the EU institutions interact with non-EU bodies, and how the various components of the European Space Programme work. A third module studies the space policy framework of EU space governance, which deals with the goals that the EU has set for itself in space. The relation between space policy and space law is not always easy to describe. A good way of visualizing it is as a hand in glove, where EU space law acts as a tool for realizing EU space policy. The final component of EU space governance is the economic framework, which will be addressed in the fourth module of this MOOC. One of the interesting things about space is that it is not only a physical space where activities take place, but also a lucrative market. The space market can be separated into a downstream and upstream segment. A third midstream segment is sometimes added to the structure. Each of these segments has its own business models, policy challenges, and opportunities that need to be considered. This complexity of EU space governance makes it very exciting to study. I invite you to test what you have learned today and head over to the next lesson. There we shall unravel how the system of EU space governance came to be.